This is lesson 10.3, the cosine function. The objectives of this lesson are to find the amplitude and period of the cosine function and to sketch the graph of the cosine function. So I want to show you, just like we did last time with sine, I want to show you how the graph of cosine is related to the unit circle. You can see here that cosine is a wave. It looks a lot like the cosine function. It's just shifted over. Here at x, the value of cosine is 1. This is a 1 on the x-axis, and so you can see that cosine starts up at 1 on the graph, up at the top of its amplitude. So we drag this along. Here the cosine is 0. Why? Right? X value is 0. Keep going. And we get down here to where cosine is -1. Right? So at 180, cosine is negative at the bottom of its amplitude. We keep going, and at 270, cosine is back to 0 again. And we're back up to the top where we started, so we've gone one cycle of cosine. And again, just like sine, you can keep going around and around and around as much as you want. So let's take a look at the graph a little more closely here in Desmos. So I've set it up a cosine bx. We want to see what the a and b do, just like we did with the sine graph, right? So as I move the a, you'll notice here a and b are 1, and the amplitude is 1, and there's one cycle happening between 0 and 2 pi. So once again, you can see, just like with sine, a affects the amplitude in the exact same way. So a is your amplitude, right? Here's at 2, and you can see that cosine is starting up there at 2, right? Drag it down to -2, and now cosine is starting at -2. So it works exactly the same as with the sine graph. And now looking at b, you can see that b also does the same thing. It affects the number of cycles that are occurring between 0 and 2 pi, right? If I set b here to 3, then you've got 3 cycles of cosine occurring from 0 to 2 pi. All right, so let's try these problems on your in-class assignment. Make sure you've downloaded it and you're following along. So if y equals a cosine b theta, what is a? So just like with sine, A is the amplitude, right? If we want to be really, really correct, it's actually going to be absolute value of A is the amplitude. Amplitude is always a positive value since it's a distance. Next question, what does B mean in the equation above? And again, it's just like with sine, right? So B is the number of cycles between 0 and 2 pi. 0 and 2 pi, right? The number of cycles. Okay? All right, so how do we calculate the period of the cosine function? Exactly the same way as we did it for sine. So just like sine, the period is going to be 2 pi over the number of cycles, the b, right? So just the same, it's pretty easy. So let's try it. Let's write an equation for the cosine function with the given information. So 3 pi cycles with an amplitude of 7. All right, so amplitude goes first, and then number of cycles goes in front of the theta, just like that. All right. Next one, let's write the equation. Amplitude is 1/2, and there are 5 cycles. So amplitude is 1/2, 5 cycles. Pretty easy, right? All right, next one, when they put the absolute value for the amplitude, so that's telling you that your A value is -4, but remember the amplitude is still +4 because amplitude is always the positive value. It's a distance. Okay? All right, so let's go backwards, just like we did with sine. So y equals -8 cosine 5 theta. So if we want to sketch, right? So our amplitude is 8. Okay, so 5 theta. So amplitude is 8. That's a critical value, right? The number of cycles is 5, which means the period is 2 pi divided by the cycles, 2 pi fifths. So in our graph here, we can put 2 pi fifths and then divide it in half. Now remember cosine, so if we divide that in half, that would be 2 pi tenths. So remember cosine starts up or down in its cycle. It doesn't start at 0 like sine does, right? So cosine starts, so on this one, it's actually going to start down there at -8 since it's starting at -8, okay? So cosine starts at the bottom here at -8, and it's going to end at the bottom at -8 too. So we'll end at 2 pi fifths and -8 right there. And then halfway between, it's going to reach its max. And then it will hit the x-axis in between each of those, right? So here it goes. It's going to come up and down like that. So that's one cycle of cosine that we have just drawn. All right, so let's try another one. -2 cosine 7 pi theta. So here we have a -2 out front, so our amplitude is 2, right? And then the number of cycles in this one is 7 pi. So that means if we want to find the period to be able to draw one cycle, we have to do 2 pi divided by number of cycles. Our pi's are going to cancel, so our period is 2/7. Okay? So go halfway, it's 1/7. Okay? All right, so it's going to start here at -2. Sorry, and it's going to end right there, and it'll be up in the middle. Okay, so you're going to start at the bottom and go up and down. And there we go. Next one. So 3 cosine 3 pi fourths. So amplitude is 3. This one is +3 cosine, so this one's going to start up at 3. Okay? So our amplitude is 3. Our number of cycles is 3 pi fourths. So then let's figure out what the period is. So it's going to be 2 pi divided by that 3 pi fourths. So remember, flip and multiply. Pi's are going to cancel, so it's 4 times 2 are 8 divided by 3, 8 divided by 3. Okay? All right. So now this one's going to be starting up. So it's going to be up at 3. It's going to be up again when we get down to 8/3, and it's going to be at the bottom halfway at 4/3. It'll hit the axis in the middle. So let's try sketching this. And there we go. Okay. Next one, a sound wave has a maximum of -5. If its midline is at 3, what is its maximum? So it's more of these. We're just doing review on these so that you don't forget how to do these when it comes to the test. So here's our wave, a midline at 3 and a minimum down here at -5. What's the maximum? Okay, so what's the amplitude there? So we're going from -5 all the way to 3. That's 8 spaces. So if we want to go to the max, we're starting at 3 and going up 8. 8 plus 3 is 11. A sound wave has a maximum of 6. If its midline is at 2/3, what is its midline? So let's draw a little sound wave. Maximum of 6. Midline at 2/3. Okay, so amplitude. If we go from 2/3 up to 6, how far have we gone? So that's like 6 minus 2/3. So that's 5 1/3. So if we're starting at 2/3 and we want to go down 5 1/3, right? So 2/3 minus 5 1/3. So 2/3 minus 5 1/3, and that puts us at -4. All right, if the period of a cosine function is 6 pi, how many cycles does it have? So again, we're like working backwards here. So remember that 2 pi over the cycles equals the period. And just like we did last lesson, you can switch these to solve. So the pi's will cancel and we're left with 2/6, and that will reduce to 1/3. Okay, so it has 1/3 of a cycle between 0 and 2 pi. All right, next one. Find the period of the cosine curve and write an equation. So let's look at this picture. So we're looking at one period right here. So it looks like this one starts at 0 and it goes to 180. So one period is 180, right? So this one's interesting because this one is actually in degrees instead of in radians. So if you see this, we just have to switch. Instead of using 2 pi, we'll use 360, right? So instead of 2 pi over the period, we'll do 360 over the period to find our number of cycles. All right, so it's going to be 360 over 180. So 360 divided by 180 is 2. And then what's our amplitude on this graph? So I see that it's going from 4 to -4, so our amplitude is 4. So this is 4 cosine 2 theta. All right. Next one, sketch one cycle of the cosine function and label the amplitude and critical values. All right, so first I see out front it says -6. So it's going to actually start down there at -6. All right, now I've got 0.5 for my number of cycles. So let's do 2 pi divided by 0.5 to get our period. So that's 2 pi divided by 1/2. So I'm going to flip and multiply times by 2 over 1 instead of dividing by 1 over 2, right? So 2 pi times 2, that makes 4 pi over 1, or 4 pi. So remember, cosine starts either up or down, not at 0 like sine. So this is going to be down here at -6, and it will be down again when we get to 4 pi. Right in the middle, it will be up, and then it will cross the x-axis halfway in between. So let's now sketch that. And there we go. Next one, 2 cosine 3 pi fifths theta. So this time our amplitude is 2 and it's positive, so we'll be starting up. If we want to do, if we want to find the period, we need to do 2 pi divided by the cycles, 3 pi fifths, so let's flip and multiply instead. Pi's will cancel out, so we get 2 times 5, or 10, over 1 times 3, so 10 thirds. So in the middle here, we'll have 5 thirds, right? So this one, since it's a positive 2, we're going to start up, cross the x-axis in the middle, and we'll end up and down at the bottom in the middle. There you go.